Hello, welcome back to my wheat growing experiment. So over the course of the year you've seen me sowing the wheat, hoeing the wheat, growing the wheat, harvesting the wheat, and it's been up in the loft above Project Kermit for quite a few weeks now. It's as dry as it's going to get. I've just brought it down and hung it up in here again, and we're ready for the last part of the process, which is going to turn this into something edible. Threshing is first, of course, and threshing just involves taking all the heads and basically mashing all the bits that we don't want from the bits that we do want. Now there's a myriad ways to do this. I had imagined building a machine to do it, but the yield is so poor I'm not going to bother making a great big machine. I can't face doing it by hand either. There's loads of ways of doing it by hand. You can just hit it with a stick over a big tarp, just keep flailing at it. You can pack loads of these into a sock and bang them on a table. I've read that one. I even came across one story of a couple that processed their entire wheat harvest by putting the individual wheat heads down and pummeling them with a rubber mallet. Now I'm not going to do that, but what I'm going to do is what they did the following year, and that's build a very simple flail device powered by a drill. So this couple run the delightfully named Win-Win Farm, and I'll provide a link to their website, which is where I got the instructions to build this thing. It's a very simple device. There. And the That's it, we're ready to roll. So once I've flailed all the bits of corn out of the heads of wheat, obviously there's going to be a load of stuff in there that we don't want, all the chaff, and that's where the winnowing comes in. And all that means is pouring this through a draft of air, which will blow away all the chaff, and the heavier bits of corn will fall into a bucket. I was going to say in the modern day all this is done by a combine harvester, but I suspect there's actually plenty of places in the world which is still more or less what I'm doing here. Let's see what happens. So we've got two so far. We just need a little bit more oomph in the wind department. This is the blower I use for the forge. Yeah, that's a bit much. Here's something I just want to show you quickly. This here is all healthy. Well, this is what you'd expect wheat heads to look like. And this one are from right down the end of the patch by the hedge. This is a sample of the rest of them. So you can see just the difference in size there is. There's obviously loads more seeds, loads more grain in each of these heads than each of these. And what's the difference? The difference is simply that at the end of the patch it was somewhat shaded. So when we had that 6 or 7 weeks of just sunshine, no rain at all, which was the whole of June, the end of May, the whole of June, absolutely cooked most of the crop, except for that last, well, a bit less than a quarter I think it was, which went on and did well. This is all a long-winded way of making an excuse that it was the weather and not me. A combination really of the weather and the ground. So the ground that I've got here is shale, and although year on year I've made more and more soil in the garden, it's still only, it has no bottom to it, as Tom the farmer says, meaning that when the weather is against you, the ground just dries out. It's got no, it can't hold the moisture at all. Once I'm done, I'm going to have to weigh it, and then we'll know the actual true yield. Even though I've done my best to lower expectations, it's still going to be disappointing, I'm sure. The chap whose technique I was following got 25 kilos after planting 1 kilo. I planted 3 kilos. I certainly don't have 25. That's all chaff on top. You can see the grain right at the bottom. And when I'm doing that, it probably looks like half the grain is going on the floor, but looking around, it's really not the case. It's a, well, I was going to say it's an amazingly effective technique, but it is the technique. It's been used for thousands of years, one way or the other. But it really does work. The grain is just that much heavier than the chaff. The grain just falls down, everything else blows away. Ooh. 1 kilo. Yeah. 2 kilos. That's now 3 kilos. I planted 3 kilos, which means that that's the profit, as it were. Oh dear. So that's how much extra over what I've planted I've managed to grow. 453 grams. Not even a bowlful really. Well, we're going to have to call it a learning experience. It's certainly not a profitable one. So that's it. That's the sum total of all that effort, all that time. Planted 3 kilos of grain, and I've harvested just shy of 3.5 kilos of grain. So once again, I'm very glad I'm not an actual farmer, because in farming terms, of course, that would be utter failure. Yeah, in any other terms, it's not great. Anyway, next up, we've got to mill it and turn it into flour, and then a loaf of bread. So the story's not over yet. It seems like an awful long time ago that we got started with this experiment. Now we're on to the last couple of processes. We've got the milling, and then the baking, and then finally will be the eating. And I've got here a hand-cranked mill. This is the thing that I've bought. I paid full whack for it, and when I say full whack, I mean nearly 100 quid. So this is by far the most expensive part of the whole experiment. There are loads of these things on eBay and on Amazon for absolute peanuts, but they look horrible. And when read the reviews of them, you can tell it's obvious that they are actually horrible in real life. This one came all the way from America. This was the only one that I found on Amazon that actually had good reviews from people that had used it to make flour. It's an incredibly simple mechanism. We've got an auger, so that's what catches the grain that's sat in this hopper here, and it pushes it, so it's a screw effectively, it pushes it against this grinding surface here. So from this angle you can see that there's a cutting surface in here, and that corresponds with the cutting surface that's there, so that when they're together, and I put this bit on the other end, I can then control how close the gap is between them, and thus how fine or coarse the product is that comes out. This is not the only way to do this. The other way, the common grinders I found available in this country tended to be ones that look like giant coffee bean grinders. So they've just got a small spinning blade inside them. They've got a cup on top. You fill that with grain and then you fire it up for however many seconds, and it just mashes everything that's in there. Now those ones, they looked pretty sketchy, but also I didn't like the idea of just having a whizzing blade mashing up the grain into flour, because you've got real potential there for pumping loads of heat into the flour. Something like this just seemed a better option. Now in my self-sufficiency book, the John Seymour book, it goes on there about making your own flour, and suggests just getting hold of a Victorian plate mill, which can be had for next to nothing. Well, that might have been true when he wrote the book all those years ago, but now those things are valuable antiques, and I couldn't find one for less than 250 quid, so that was out of the question. What you can find for around about the same sort of money are the stone mills, where you've got two stones spinning round, just like you would in an actual proper oldie-weldy mill, but those are hundreds of pounds. So this seemed to be the best option. Now it says in the instructions to put 3 cups of grain through it first, in case there's any, I think, in case there's any bits of metal in there from the manufacturer. So we'll do that. It'll be good to practice on. So this is not the grain from here. This is chicken feed. Although it does look very similar. I probably I should have just tried making bread out of this. So the cheaper mills could be had for about 20-25 quid, but reading the reviews of them, they were universally dire. That looks like flour. Right now, let's give it a go with the real thing. So I need 500 grams of flour to make a small loaf of bread. It says in the booklet here that you can get an electric motor to go on this, but I didn't see one in the Amazon listing. It's not exactly hard work though. In fact, the main issue I'm having is that my table is not terribly sturdy. The table is Victorian. And I've restored it twice and it's still a bit woodly. That's it, 500. And we got a little bit for dusting as well. Now I'm not brilliant at making bread by any means, but it's also not a difficult process. People have been doing it for a very long time, and the basics are very basic. So I'm just going to follow the basic recipe that's in my self-sufficiency book. This is the John Seymour self-sufficiency book, which is a go-to for all of this kind of stuff. Whether it's I don't know, skinning a rabbit to baking bread, is all in here. Yeah, so 1, 2 teaspoons of sugar. going to zero the scales again. This water's about 30 degrees. So after just a few minutes, you can see we've got a nice head on that. In it goes. That's it, that's all the ingredients. That's it. So the dough is getting much stiffer now. Much stiffer, which is all the gluten forming. It's weird, gluten gets a really bad rep these days, but it's actually essential. It's what makes bread really. If you don't have any gluten in it, it tends to turn into cake. And cake's fine, but it's a different thing. So in a bit, this will be stiff enough for this to stand up on its own. And I'm going to cover it and leave it overnight. There we go. And that's it. I'm going to put it in the living room on a bookshelf because I've got a fire going in there, so that will keep it nice and warm, not hot but just warm, so that the yeast can do its thing. And then in the morning we'll bake this and have warm bread ready for lunchtime. It's the next morning. The dough has risen nicely, as you'll see in a moment. At first though, we're in the garden because I want to make a soup to go with the bread. Pumpkin soup. The pumpkin's in there. I just need a few other items, mostly from the polytunnel, and I'm hopefully going to dig up some onions. Considering it's November, I'm astonished there's any tomatoes to be had, but they're still ripening. These pepper plants are amazing. I'm going to take them in and see if I can keep them going all winter. So we want a green one for this. And finally some chilies. So a bunch of tomatoes, one chili pepper and a green pepper. So I'm hoping that over here we can find some onions. Just two. We'll get to all the vegetables in a bit. Obviously this is the main event, the bread making. So you can see overnight it's risen probably, well, over twice what it was. So now we've got to knead it. So as before, I'm just loosely following the instructions in my self-sufficiency book. I'll put my version of the recipe and my recipe for the pumpkin soup in the video description, just in case anyone's interested. Although really, when it comes to wholemeal bread, as you've seen, it's incredibly simple. And if you buy a packet of flour, there's usually a recipe on that. That's that done with. I'll give that a wash in a moment and we'll use that for the soup. This is very much the messy bit. I'm probably going to need more flour as well. And so what I'm trying to do here is to stiffen it up, but also get the gluten moving about and turn it from a sticky lump into something that's going to turn into a loaf. That's really started to stiffen up and it feels much more elastic. Okay, we're going to need some butter. I'm only making a little loaf because I've only got a little tin and, as you'll see in a moment, I've only got a little oven. In fact, when I mention the oven, I'll turn it on and get it up to heat. So you might notice here, there's a big gap where the cooker used to be. That was the gas cooker, which I got rid of the moment I moved back into this barn. And I've been cooking on solar power, well, with occasional top up from the wood burning range, but mostly solar power ever since I've moved in. And that's what's whirring away in there. I've just got a little electric fan oven. I will get a full-size electric oven to go in there, but I'm also going to remodel the whole kitchen, and I've been putting all that off because I need Kermit on the road to go and get the new cooker. And turns out building a Land Rover takes ages. Put that in there. Right, I'm going to put this on top of the oven just for 5-10 minutes. The oven needs to come up to temperature anyway. Might get a little bit more rise out of that. I've just heard it click, so the oven's come up to temperature now. Now this is a really horrible little fan oven. The concept is brilliant because it's a small oven, heats really quickly, doesn't use much energy, but the build quality on this particular one, I'm not even sure what the name of it is because the name rubbed off. That's how good it was. Sauté or sauté or something like that. Anyway, it's rubbish. I mention this because I'm going to have to put up the temperature. So the recipe in the book says 220 degrees for 3/4 of an hour. I'm going to do it at 230 for a whole hour. So it's at temperature now, so we'll bang it in. Wind it all the way around to 60. While that's baking then, we can get on with the soup. So I've cleaned the saucepan. Get that warming up. This is an induction hob. It's a brilliant bit of kit. This was just it's an IKEA portable one. I don't know what it's called. I picked it up second hand off eBay for next to nothing, about 20 quid or so, just as an experiment, and it's turned into my main cooking implement, tool, machine, my main cooking device. Very efficient, very controllable, and because it only heats the pot, it doesn't heat itself. Like if you imagine like a normal hot plate, it heats the hot plate, and the hot plate in turn heats the saucepan or whatever. Obviously with an induction hob, I'm just heating the saucepan there, not the cooker itself. I liked it so much I went out and bought another one. I found that green peppers work better for this dish because the pumpkin is quite sweet, so red peppers would just add to the sweetness, and I think with a soup you're always trying to balance the different flavours and make them work together instead of all adding up. I'm going to start on this. Obviously I'm not going to use all of it, but what I will do is work through the whole pumpkin and dice up all of it and freeze what I don't use. Because I have a freezer now. Thanks to Katie. So from experience I know that if I chop up chilies just using my hands like I do with all the other vegetables, at some point I'm going to rub my eyes or my nose or something and I'll be unhappy. Let's see what we got with tomatoes. So you can see some of these tomatoes are split from being overripe, and this is a perfect way to use them up. It's the only thing that didn't come from the garden. It's a little some vegetable stock. And I've got some salt in there. That's it. Which one have we got then? I'll bring that to the boil and then I'll put it down to a simmer for half an hour. So that's half an hour simmering away. Let's see how soft it is. Yeah, it's ready for mashing. So rather than whiz it up with a blender or whatever, I just prefer to mash it with a masher. I have tried using a hand blender before, but it just turns it all into a homogeneous puree, which I don't like. It just, apart from anything else, just gives me flashbacks to being in hospital and being fed liquidised food. Not happy memories. So with the homemade masher here, I get the right texture. That's that. And then I'll just leave that for a couple of hours. Well, the cooker's just gone ping, so that's an hour up. Let's see how it looks. Look at that, proper loaf. So it grew so much in the tin, it's actually pushed up against one of the heating elements. So it's strangely a little bit lopsided. But there it is. Moment of truth then. So it's had about half an hour to cool down. Yep, it's definitely bread. I knew the soup was going to be good. That is nice. So this sort of stodgy loaf complements soup brilliantly. Well, there we go, people. That's the story of the hardest won loaf that you've ever come across. This loaf has cost me about £120 and a great deal of work. Would I do it all again? Well, I've just spent a load of money on that meal, so I should really. What I'd want is some way of guaranteeing being able to irrigate the crop if we have another heat wave like we did this year, because that's really what did for the wheat. So in farming terms, it's been a complete disaster. I planted 3 kilos and I ended up, the overall yield was 3.5 kilos, more or less. So that's terrible. by any calculation, that's terrible. But it's an experiment, and the only failed experiment is where you don't learn anything. And I learned a great deal. So in those terms, it was a success. And in terms of getting the result at the end of it, I have something edible, so that's a win as well. There's something about homemade bread, it just has a nice taste, a lot of taste. Maybe that's the difference. There's a depth of taste to it. Well, it took me best part of a year to get from a bag of seeds to a loaf of bread. Lots of different processes involved, some of them much more fun than others. Overall though, my main takeaway is a renewed appreciation for farmers and modern farming techniques. I'm very happy to have learnt how to make my own bread, how to grow my own bread, but I'm even more happy to know that I don't have to. Right, I'm going to finish my lunch and I'll see you all in the next stuff project. Cheers.